doesn't matter which size you are. We talked about lean resources. Every company has lean resources. And you have to think about programs in a way where you can actually build it up. And either it requires very little maintenance, or you can hand off the maintenance to a different team. We came up with the idea of doing self-service threat modeling, where first we would teach engineering how to do threat modeling. We watch them perform it live and provide feedback through those sessions. And then later on, we would review the artifacts to see if they're doing it correctly. And that we learned so many great things as part of that program, including engineers are way better at threat modeling than we are. For my recommendation is startups should look at the very basics and making sure that they're doing that well. And actually, they should really try to scale those initially.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Security Repo Podcast. Anyone in application or product security can know that it can be very difficult for any company of any size. But as startups grow into enterprises or existing companies start to evolve, how do you effectively scale your security program? Well, we have an amazing guest to talk about this today. Jeevan Singh, who is a director of product security at Twilio, and is here to talk about how to effectively scale an application security program in an enterprise. Jeevan's lifelong fascination with defensive security began at a young age when he played the center-back position on his youth soccer team. He loved the thrill of preventing opponents from scoring and was intrigued by the strategy behind the defensive measures. This fascination grew throughout his adolescence and into university when a close friend showed him how malicious users could penetrate systems and taught him how to prevent attacks. For as long as he could remember, he's continuously examined scenarios from every imaginable angle to try and find weaknesses and penetrate defenses in order to protect himself. As an information security architect, he is still driven by the same fascination that applies these same principles as he protects the company and guards consumer data. His philosophy is to build security from the ground up and make it as transparent as possible. He does this by collaborating with software architects and senior developers to identify practical options for building secure systems, empowering developers and working with sysadmins and network engineers to determine effective approaches for operating security. He also works towards creating a positive security culture, instilling employees with security knowledge, and building defenses against security threats. We are so lucky to have Jeevan on the program today. So without further ado, let's dive into our episode on scaling AppSec programs.
So you are a director of product security, and at the same time, you co-lead an OWASP chapter in your spare time, or your giving back your open source contribution time, I should say. Are those interrelated? Do you think one is as a result of the other, or are they like independent, separate parts of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question there. And I do want to say they're interrelated. So I think they're related in a way that when I was thinking about switching over to security, um, I went to security conferences. I knew no one there, but the community completely embraced me. And one particular individual, he knows I was deer in the headlights. This is B-Sides Vancouver, but in 2015. Deer in the headlights, didn't know what I was doing. He came over to me. He's like, "Hey, are you new?" And he literally showed me around everywhere, introduced me to folks. And it was I knew at that moment that I had to figure out how to get into security. And I want to do that for others as well. Me being involved with OWASP, we put on AppSec PNW, a conference in Portland earlier this year. People reaching out to me, LinkedIn all the time, asking for advice. I want to give back as much as I felt that I've received. And I enjoy doing it as well. I think folks are in a much better place nowadays than mid 2010s. There's a lot more resourcing and there's a lot more folks. The community is a lot more organized. I think they're interrelated because I can't do one without doing the other.
The security community is I think it's one of the best, definitely in tech.
one of my favorite, I've mentioned this before, but it was such a mind bending experience for me. I was volunteering in B-Sides Vegas last year, and I was just on the registration desk, and the two people next to me were CISOs, one of a Fortune 500 company and one of a very significant company. And these are the guys handing out registrations. And, like you ask, like, why are you here? And they'll just like, this is the first conference I came to. This is where the love started for me. So every year I come here and I hand out registration badges. And I was just kind of like, this is such a life hack for meeting these kind of people is to get involved in the community, because I think it's one of the only, well, I mean, I can't say, but in tech, you just see that so much in security that people are very, very welcoming. And I don't know if you would expect it before you open that door.
Yeah, the when you hear on the news security folks, you hear about these hackers and black hats that are there to sort of take over companies, install malware. But when you actually go to a conference and embrace security folks, it is something else. So they are welcoming, they're open arms, they're very kind. We all understand we're all struggling. It's security resources are lean at every company. There's not going to be any company that you're like, I think we have too many security people. I don't know what we're going to do with all these resources. So we all we all know that we all understand the challenges that we're all encountering, and we want to make sure that we help one another.
So I'm glad you brought up Pacific Northwest, AppSec Days Pacific Northwest, because that's where I met you. That's where I got the chance to invite you onto the program based on our conversation around application security, AppSec in general. And you had some interesting opinions and thoughts around scaling AppSec. And I think that might tie in with your day-to-day work there. We're in a fairly sizable operation, so you probably have some good insights. So, what are the major concerns you're seeing right now around AppSec security scaling?
Yeah, great question. And I'm actually giving a talk at Global AppSec later this year, just on this topic as well. So um, I, it, I work for a company called Twilio. We employ many thousands of engineers, and our team is our security engineering team is pretty good, and we have a fairly decent ratio. But not everyone in security engineering is in product security, dealing with application security things. So you have to think of ways that you can scale your program without relying on every single person on your team doing that particular working on that particular program. And I see that same sort of struggle at a lot of different companies where it doesn't matter which size you are. We talked about lean resources. Every company has lean resources, and you have to think about programs in a way where you can actually build it up, and either it requires very little maintenance or you can hand off the maintenance to a different team. So we've done throughout my career, we've done that for a bunch of different programs, and one of which we sort of started that scaling journey with talking about threat modeling. Um, my CISO at Segment, Colleen, when I joined the company, I asked what's the main thing that she wanted me to tackle, and she's like, the security engineering team has a lot of operational work, and specifically on the threat modeling side, how do we ensure that as engineering grows way faster than security, we are not stuck doing operational work day in, day out, and that's all we're doing. So we came up with the idea of doing self-service threat modeling, where first we would teach engineering how to do threat modeling. We watch them perform it live and provide feedback through those sessions. And then later on, we would review the artifacts to see if they're doing it correctly. And that we learned so many great things as part of that program, including engineers are way better at threat modeling than we are. They know their systems much deeper. If you sort of point them in the right direction and let them know the type of things that we're looking for, um, they do a much, much better job than we do. We come in, we get about an hour of education on what the system is, and then we just scratch the surface for that. So that was a great way for us to understand how we can scale our threat modeling program. It didn't mean that we'd stop doing threat modeling. it meant that we can actually focus our energy on the most important parts of the system and threat model those, whereas the engineers themselves will focus on everything else. So for that particular program, the heavy lifting would be on the engineering side. And it was really easy to maintain that program. And there's a number of other sorts of programs that we've also rolled out in the similar vein, where security engineering shouldn't be doing the heavy lifting, but we can push it in a way so that we can actually understand what are the requirements. And overall, the goal is always to reduce risk.
It's interesting because this really sounds like, a lot of people, we love buzzwords in security, and I'm not sure who came up with DevSecOps, but bringing together all these teams. But this is kind of sounds like what it looks like in practice, where you actually bring together, developers and incorporate them into the process. But I have a question about this because Twilio is massive. We all know it. We're all big fans of some of the great work that comes out of Twilio. But what if you're not Twilio and you're not a large company? How do you start? When let me rephrase that. When should a company really start thinking about scaling it at security? Is this something that you should consider for large enterprises, at your scale, or can smaller companies adopt some of these practices to kind of almost plan for the future?
Yes, big companies have big budgets, and it's really hard to match those big budgets. And like, if there is a program that I want to scale and I know it's important for the future of Twilio, I'll make a business case and we'll find budget to actually implement it. But startups are not in the same boat as Twilio. Um, when I talk about scaling programs, it doesn't necessarily mean you're let me walk one step back. I feel that there's a maturity model when it comes to application security programs, and one is like ad hoc or no security. One is sort of foundational, which is more doing things manually, and then you move to scaled, where there's a great reduction of manual efforts. And then you move to the automated, where it's a no touch type of situation. Um, when you think about those four different stages, doesn't necessarily mean your entire program needs to be scaled. You want to make sure that you're thinking about the programs that are very, very important to you. And it doesn't, for my recommendation is, startups should look at the very basics and making sure that they're doing that well. And actually, they should really try to scale those initially. One of the I think the more impactful program that I've ever had in my career is around vulnerability management. So one of the things within vulnerability management is a lot of places you have a lot of tools that will scan in, maybe have findings from pen tests, maybe have findings from your bug bounty, and your job as a security engineer is to create those vulnerability tickets, hand it off to the appropriate owners, and hopefully they fix it. There might be some SLAs, and then you're chasing them to fix those vulnerabilities on time. And what I've learned throughout my career is that that's busy work, and that's not really productive for the security engineering team. And what we should do is rather hand off that responsibility to the actual risk owner and have them go through a self-service SLA extension process. If they don't feel the need to fix this vulnerability right now, or they don't have the timing's not right, they don't have the resources, that's okay. It's up to them, and it's up to them when they want to actually fix it. Our jobs as security folks is that we want to actually paint the overall risk picture for the business. So I want to make sure that I understand all of the vulnerabilities over SLA. Then I work with the engineering leadership or the execs and just say, okay, these are the hot spots that I'm seeing. These are the teams that are not adhering to our security policies. There should be action on that. So I'm really shifting that work from the security plate onto the actual risk owners and having them responsible for it. So I feel that programs like this, at the very early stages of a startup, if you implement this, it will be a cultural shift as well. People understand culturally security is engineering's responsibility, whereas risk is security's responsibility. Our job is to bubble up that risk, make sure that people understand where the risk is and what should be addressed. So there might be some sort of scaled programs that should start while you're a startup, which will shift the culture of security within your startup, so that when you actually grow big and you have to focus on other type of programs, you already have that strong mindset for security and appetite for security within the organization. So definitely there's room for scaled security programs within startups themselves.
So you mentioned something really interesting there, something that I've been thinking about a lot since I got into the security space, is that difference between risk and vulnerability. And as you're having the communication, so we've had other guests on that've talked about talking to the board of director versus your exec team versus individual contributors. And it's pretty clear delineation at that level. But where you're sitting, like you have to be on top of everything, the risks and the vulnerabilities. So as you're having these conversations with the people that are tracking vulnerabilities, how much are you informing them about, hey, this is the overall risk that is associated with this, versus the other direction where you're talking about risks? How much do you mention or even bring in specific vulnerabilities into that discussion?
Great question. And it's very timely. We're actually going through the process right now at Twilio where we have a very, very strong vulnerability management program. And our risk program isn't just there right now, but we also want to provide evidence. So we might be seeing a lot of risk that are happening in the business. And we'll look at our vulnerabilities, actual uh, physical things that can be resolved, and we want to marry those. We want to marry vulnerabilities to risks so that people have a much, much clearer picture itself within the organization. And ultimately, like I mentioned it earlier, what I am extremely passionate about is burning down risk in itself. So being able to talk to the right folks, the folks that are running the security risk program, making sure that they are packaging the information in a way that both the execs understand, but also engineering leadership down to the IC level, so that they can understand and say, yeah, no, I agree. This is a pretty big deal and we should be addressing. But also making sure that we tie it in with a bunch of vulnerabilities. So it makes it really you can quantify the actual impact when you address these risks as well.
There's so much to kind of unpack here. This has been fascinating, but I can I can just envision some of the people that I know listen to this screaming at their computer, wondering about something right now. And one of the things you mentioned a lot is getting, let's just say, developer buy-in in security. You're getting the engineers to actually be part of the, that process. So I love that because I've always found that that developers can really help in this. I mean, that's my background. But how do you get a developer who's often cares about getting their features released on time, or different things? How do you get developer buy-in for security?
Yeah, there's always conflicting signals that comes from the business. You have to fix your vulnerabilities. You have a bunch of defects that our customers are waiting on. You have these new features that we need in order to sell more product. How do you decide what is important? And there's two approaches to it. One is bottom ups, one is top down. In order to have a strong security program, you need to have a top down message. And it has to be clear from the CEO, CTO, downwards, SVPs, GMs, all that at those levels, that security is number one priority. And I've been fortunate. That's happened at most of the companies that have been in my career, where the CEO will be at a town hall and just talking about the importance of security and how important it is that our clients know that their data is in safe hands. So if you have that consistent messaging from the CEO and the executive suite, then it's a lot easier to work with the appropriate leaders within engineering and say, okay, this is the data that I see. I need you to start addressing these things. But you also have to have understanding and buy-in from ISCs as well. It's really hard for them to it's really hard for them if you drop, say, you ran a new scan, your SaaS scan, you drop 1,000 vulnerabilities onto their plate. Some are false positives, some might not be relevant, some are just really, really difficult to fix. So you really have to have the empathy and understanding of where the developers are and how do you actually work and communicate with them. One of the things that we're working through right now is that we're building out our security tooling program where we have all these security tools. I want to make sure that we're leveraging them appropriately within the business and we're running them at 100% coverage. So we have great coverage. We have all this data within the security tools. A lot of folks would just say, okay, let's cut all these vulnerability tickets. And that doesn't make sense because some of these tools maybe have 1,000 critical vulnerabilities. How do you get your engineers to fix 1,000 critical vulnerabilities? You don't do it by actually creating 1,000 tickets. That's the opposite direction. They're not going to pay attention if they're drowning in tickets. If all items are critical, then nothing is critical, sort of situation. So I always like doing the crawl, walk, run, and I sometimes add a sprint in there. Crawling is provide that visibility, pull in the data, provide dashboards to the engineering folks so that they can understand. And a lot of folks will actually look at it and say, hey, my repo's in that list. Let me just take care of the ones that belong to us. So you'll notice a decline right there. Then you actually review the data and make sure you prioritize it. Not all 1,000 are actually going to be critical. You want to maybe marry it with some of the context that you have in your system and start cutting tickets. So maybe 20%, we're going to cut 200 tickets for 3,000 engineers. You know that that ratio will get fixed. Next step I typically have is where we run, and that is where you would actually put blockers. Don't allow folks to actually check in code that may contain a critical vulnerability. And the final step is sprint. We haven't gotten to that one yet, but it would be more with automated fixes. So we would have to be very, very confident with our test suite before we get to there. But we want to put it in a position where engineers don't even have to think about security patching. It will automatically happen for them. So we want to be in the developer's shoes, feel empathy for them, and walk with them slowly through the process so that they understand we're working hand in hand with them to ultimately burn down that risk.
Excellent. That's a lot of good information in there. If the goal, I mean, ultimately the goal is get rid of all vulnerabilities. That's the ultimate there. But I'm wondering, how do you track success? Like, what are the actual metrics you're looking at across the team? You go and have a conversation with the dev is great, saying, how are you doing? Wonderful qualitative data is great. But at scale, that's really hard to do. The quantitative, what is on those dashboards that lets you know that you're doing it right?
Yeah, the timing again is perfect because we're pulling in all this data from all of these tools. But we talked a lot about the vulnerability management process, and um, for me, it is always: are we addressing all of the most important issues within the organization? And with our vulnerability management program, when we kicked it off, I can't remember how many P1s we had. It was a large number of P1s. And we built that system in where the risk owners are responsible for addressing their P1s, their critical high vulnerabilities. And naturally, putting in the system, we saw overall decline. So I think we went from like 100 P1 vulnerabilities. And I think it was earlier this month, we literally had 0 P1 vulnerabilities. So it really was being able to work with leadership, getting them in a culture of having them understand that security is very important, and building out the dashboards and information that they need to see to make sure that they're tracking in the right direction. But that's like the metrics part of it. But you also have to tell the story as well. So our head of InfoSec has a monthly business review meeting with all of the major stakeholders, the exec team, as well as senior engineering leadership, where he's talking about the story. He will let folks know. And the great thing about Twilio is that we have a really open culture where it's okay to say that folks are not doing their job. And business leaders want to hear that. If they know that security doesn't feel that they're focusing enough on the appropriate things, the business leaders will hear that message, work with security, and go to a place where they're actually dealing with the appropriate issues. So we're well on our ways to actually get through our P2s now. We have this system. So dashboards are there. Leadership knows what is important, what's not important. And on a monthly basis, we're talking to them in this large forum where they're understanding what are the priorities. So my goal initially is I want to make sure that I have strong information on all of our vulnerabilities, what's in SLA, what's not in SLA. I want to know if all of the vulnerability details are correct. So sometimes people move on and we have, is the assignee still at the company? If their person assigned to this vulnerability is not here, it's not going to get fixed. So we have a lot of these details to make sure that the quality of the vulnerability ticket is quite high. I also have a lot of security tooling metrics from coverage to understanding what we may think perceive are P1s in those security tools, where they may land within the organization. So I can give those BUs a heads up that these vulnerabilities are coming. And then ultimately, I want to understand the risk, that how much risk we're actually burning. So I can quantify. Ultimately, I want to be able to know if I'm doing a good job or not as well.
That's the dream, is we can look at one number and know instantly, like, we're doing great. But wow, what a messy world of so many moving parts, so many people involved. Yeah, not in an enviable position in that regard.
I'm super excited about it because we weren't in that position last year. We rebuilt the foundation, Twilio. We grew very, very rapidly. So not all the programs were able to scale as fast. So we rebuilt the foundation. And then now we're really, really focusing on making sure that we integrate the security tools, but provide the appropriate metrics so that we actually can have that strong story that we can go to engineering and execs and say, hey, we need more work. We need more work in these areas.
So part of the experience of growing includes, adding bodies, adding more people to the team. So we rarely get the chance to talk to somebody at a director level on this program, not to harp on your title, but what are you looking for out there as you're going through applicants, as you're looking to fill roles? Are there any bits of advice you could give our listeners who are trying to move in that direction?
Oh man, I really love that question. So we're talking a lot about scaling right now, and there are three different things that I look for application security engineer. The first part is that they can actually do application security. So have you run a bug bounty? Have you run a pen test from end to end? Have you done security reviews, threat modeling? Can you speak with engineers on their level so that you can actually get them to fix vulnerabilities? So really looking for folks that can actually do that, the application security side. But as we talk about scaling's a lot more on you're looking at problems and understanding how you can actually redo it, refix the program so that you can implement it and not really be hands-on on it for time. So from that standpoint, I'm looking for two areas. I'm looking for engineers. And when I talk about engineers, it's like someone that can understand the problem, break it down into smaller pieces, and then come up with a great solution for it. So it could be a particular program, or it could be tools that you build. So when we go through the interview process, we will dive much, much deeper into your engineering mindset. a lot of folks within the team don't have to be coding all the time, but you have to have some sort of coding ability. The last area that I'm really looking to and really focusing on it this year and beyond is, um, can you teach? So as we learn, as as we learn as a team, the only way that we can actually grow and scale with the organization is if engineering is doing a lot of the heavy lifting as well. So earlier we talked about self-service threat modeling. That is one small aspect of it, but we're actually really looking at rebuilding our security champions program, where these individuals can potentially work on the product security team at some point. So they'll be really, really strong with understanding doing code reviews. They'd be able to do very simple offensive security. They know how to threat model. More importantly, when you're at an org where there's about 100, 110 security folks, do you even know who to reach out to in security if you have a question? You may have a compliance related question. Who do you actually reach out to? Or if you're dealing with a customer that has a security question, who else do you reach out to? So um, the basics understanding of what actually the security team looks like, the security org is like, and these champions ultimately, we want the program to scale. The theme of today. At the end of all of this training, we're expecting them to be actually able to run the training themselves. So we want these security champions to be actually really, really good at how the soft skills and being able to relay that information. So um, the security engineers that we hire have to be good at AppSec. They have to be good at engineering so that they can scale, but also really, really strong at teaching that soft skills so that we can build security champions that can actually help us with our security program moving forward. So great question. That's the future application security engineer, someone that can hit all those three different areas.
That is really interesting insight, because we often hear, we have this one person on the team who's great at this, but they don't know how to communicate that to other people. They don't know how to transfer that, and that doesn't scale at all. You can have like one person, but that's the one that the Phoenix Project. You had, I forget the character's name. They had the one super powered character, but he couldn't get the knowledge out of his head, and they had to figure out how to make that happen. And that's a good chunk of the book. So it sounds like you're already on top of that, and you're moving in the right direction there.
Yeah, it goes back to that old sort of like motto. I rather have 10 1x engineers rather than one 10x engineer. Way easier to scale that.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I really hope that someone that's interviewing for an AppSec engineer job at Twilio finds this, because that's good. That's like the cheat codes for for what you're looking for. But look, we're coming to the end, and I want to be sensitive of your time. And I can't believe how much amazing information has been jam packed into here. But I want to have a little bit of fun before we start winding things up. I like to play a game with everyone called Best and Worst, which is the best advice and worst advice that you could give to someone. So I want to ask you, what is the best security advice that you would give to a business? And then right after that, I want to know, what's the kind of worst advice that you regularly hear, or maybe someone's given that companies often fall over?
The best advice for a startup would be, let's make sure that it's really important for the business to know that everyone is actually responsible for security. We go back to security is responsible for risk, bubbling up risk, building out programs to address risk. But ultimately, it is the various parts of the business, be it HR or marketing or engineering, that actually have to address security concerns themselves. So if you start that journey early on, if you're a startup with 10, 20 people, and remind folks that security is all of our responsibility. And as you grow, you still have that sort of feeling. Don't only have the security team focus on it. That will be where security can easily scale in those sorts of organizations. Worst advice, it always feels that folks that are trying to get into security are looking at offensive security. they always say, hey, go do bug bounties. It's great to understand how malicious actors are attacking systems, but it doesn't really help you address how you can actually fix those things. So my advice for individuals is network. I mean, talk to people within security, pick their mind. They're more than willing to share their insights that they have. So definitely chat with them, pick their mind, um, understand the type of programs, understand the type of information that is important to them, and how you can actually slowly work towards becoming a security engineer, heavy emphasis on the engineering part, and rolling out programs that will scale through any organization.
That's awesome. And I'll just add to that, if you really want to be able to chat to high-level people to get them to sit down and give you time, start a security podcast. It's the best hack I've ever found in my life.
Life pro tip right there.
It's literally like one of the reasons why we started this is because, we just wanted to be able to chat to people like you. With that being said, I just really want to thank you for sharing your time, sharing your knowledge. It's been a really fascinating episode. I've certainly taken a lot away from it. Dwayne, I'll hand it over to you. Do you have any final words before we press the big red button?
Yeah, I just want to give you a chance, Jeevan, to maybe plug a particular organization that does make those networking um, opportunities available, and that you might be familiar with or associated with.
For sure. I always love to plug all of the chapters. So either obviously, I'm a huge fan of OWASP. So if you ever want to learn a lot more about application security, go to your local OWASP chapter. I know a lot of them struggled during COVID, but a lot of them are now having in-person meetups again. So OWASP Vancouver, we regularly get 70, 80 people coming out once a month for our events. So go do that. If you're into other sorts of security type of parts of security, GRC or threat detection, there are a lot of other organizations. So definitely get involved, find out what's happening locally within your city, get involved, meet with other security folks. OWASP is a great one, but ISACA has a lot of great chapters as well. There are a lot of other great sort of local security meetups that you can go to. So definitely go out there, be social, build your networking skills, build your security skills. You'll do well in your career.
Yeah, awesome advice.
Well, thanks for being a guest today. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge.
Thanks for having me. These were fantastic questions. Sometimes I don't get to go as deep as I want to into a lot of the programs that I like to run at scale.